It was a thunderous, rattling, corrugated machine that taught an entire nation how to trust the sky. But to understand why this plane was so revolutionary, you have to understand the world it was born into. The year is 1926. America is roaring. The Great War is a memory. The economy is booming, and technology is advancing at a breathtaking pace. Yet commercial aviation in the United States is not an industry. It's a patchwork of barnstormers, airmail contractors, and wealthy enthusiasts. The very concept of a scheduled passenger airline is viewed with profound skepticism. The public's perception of flight is shaped by two extremes: the romantic, daring aviator in his open cockpit biplane, and the tragic front-page stories of fiery crashes. This skepticism was rooted in hard reality. Most aircraft of the era were constructed of wood, wire, and fabric materials vulnerable to weather, wear, and catastrophic failure. Engines were notoriously unreliable. Forced landings were a routine part of any long-distance flight. Passengers, when they could be convinced to board, sat in open or semi-enclosed cabins, exposed to the elements, deafened by the wind and engine roar, and often airsick from the turbulent low-altitude flight. Travel was an act of courage, not convenience. Airlines, where they existed, operated more like irregular taxi services than scheduled transportation. There were no unified safety regulations, no nationwide airway system with beacons for night flight, and certainly no concept of passenger comfort. This was the fragmented, perilous landscape of American aviation when the Ford Motor Company, fresh from revolutionizing ground transportation, turned its gaze upward. Henry Ford's interest wasn't mere hobbyism. He, like other industrial titans, saw the airplane not just as a machine, but as the next logical frontier for American commerce and connectivity. The Model T had put a nation on wheels. A reliable aircraft could shrink the continent itself. The U.S. government was pushing this vision through its airmail contracts, subsidizing the development of cross-country routes. But the mail planes of the early 1920s, like the de Havilland DH-4, a militarized wood and fabric biplane, were ill-suited for carrying people. They were noisy, cold, and offered no protection in a crash. Into this void of public confidence and technological limitation stepped the Ford Trimotor. Its development story is a wild saga of theft, a fire of incredible convenience, and an ugly duckling that transformed modern life. The journey begins not with Henry Ford, but in the mind of a stubborn, brilliant, and perpetually cash-strapped engineer named William Bushnell Stout. To call Stout an eccentric would be an understatement. He was a visionary whose ideas were often decades ahead of the infrastructure and materials needed to realize them. He was a fervent evangelist for all-metal aircraft construction, arguing passionately against the prevailing orthodoxy of wood and fabric. Metal, he insisted, offered durability, consistency, and safety that organic materials could never match. It wouldn't rot, warp, or tear. In 1922, he founded the Stout Metal Airplane Company in Dearborn, Michigan, a venture backed by a consortium of investors that included none other than Henry and Edsel Ford. Stout's early designs, like the single-engine air sedan, were ambitious. They featured corrugated metal skins and cantilevered wings design elements that would later define the Trimotor. But they were also flawed, complex, and expensive. His Tuet Pullman, an 8-passenger monoplane, won a coveted U.S. Postal Service contract but was mechanically troublesome. By 1925, Stout's company was on the brink of collapse, a brilliant dream stifled by financial reality and technical growing pains. This moment of crisis coincided with Henry Ford's decisive entry into aviation. Ford was not just investing, he was acquiring. He purchased Stout's company and folded it into the Ford Motor Company as the Stout Metal Airplane Division. His ambition was characteristically vast: to apply the principles of the automobile assembly line standardization, efficiency, mass production to the airplane. He wanted to build aircraft like he built Model Ts, reliable, affordable, and in vast numbers. He launched the Ford Air Transport Service to carry airmail, creating an instant customer for his own products, and inaugurated the Ford Reliability Tours cross-country air races that emphasized safety and consistency over pure speed. Aimed squarely at convincing a wary public, the stage was set for a breakthrough aircraft. But the first act was a fiasco. Under Ford's ownership, Stout was tasked with designing a 3-engine transport, the Stout 380. The result was an aerodynamic catastrophe. It was spectacularly ugly. With 3 uncowled radial engines haphazardly mounted in a way that destroyed lift and created tremendous drag, its cockpit was a precarious perch atop the fuselage. On its maiden flight in late 1925, Ford's chief test pilot, a veteran named Rudolf Shorty Schroeder, found the aircraft barely controllable. After a few harrowing circuits of the field, he landed and famously declared he would never fly the thing again. Another pilot's report was scathing, stating it was unsafe to land even on Ford's large, paved airfield. Henry Ford witnessed this humiliation in person and left the field in stony silence. Then fortune or something more deliberate intervened on January 16, 1926. The stout factory burned to the ground in a spectacular fire. The 3AT prototype was reduced to ashes. The cause was officially undetermined, but the timing was impeccably convenient. The fire provided a clean slate. Ford, with Stout now dispatched on a lengthy promotional lecture tour, assembled a new, young engineering team free from previous allegiances. The directive, according to lore, was blunt. Ford had been impressed by a Fokker F7 Trimotor he'd acquired. He reportedly told his new team, "Build one like that, but make it out of metal." The team, led by talented engineers like Tom Towle, Harold Hicks, and John Lay, did exactly that. They married the proven three-engine monoplane layout to the Fokker with Stout's all-metal corrugated skin construction philosophy. The result, the Ford 480 prototype, was a revelation. It flew for the first time on June 11, 1926. This time, Shorty Schroeder's report was effusive. The plane was stable, forgiving, and strong. It had three 200-horsepower Wright Whirlwind engines, the same reliable power plants that had carried Charles Lindbergh across the Atlantic a year later. The logic was as brilliant as it was marketable. If one engine failed, you still had to. This simple promise of redundancy became the cornerstone of its sales pitch to a fearful public. Ford moved with breathtaking speed from prototype to production. He transformed a section of his vast industrial empire into an aircraft assembly line, the first of its kind in the world. Raw aluminum sheets came in one end. Completed airplanes painted and ready, rolled out the other. This was not craft, this was manufacture. It allowed Ford to control quality and, crucially, cost. The Trimotor was not cheap, but it was far more affordable than a comparable hand-built aircraft could ever be. The plane's design was brutally functional. Its corrugated aluminum skin, reminiscent of a washboard, provided immense structural rigidity without heavy internal bracing. The cabin, though noisy and Spartan by later standards, was a fully enclosed, heated space for up to 12 passengers. It had proper windows, upholstered wicker seats, and even a small lavatory. For the first time, flying did not require a helmet, goggles, and a leather coat. Passengers could wear their street clothes. This was a critical psychological shift. Air travel was being normalized. Airlines, sensing the shift, placed orders. The Ford Trimotor became the backbone of the nascent airline industry. Transcontinental Air Transport (TET), which later became TWA, used it for its groundbreaking Lindbergh Line coast-to-coast service, which combined daylight Trimotor flights with overnight train travel. Pan American Airways used it to pioneer international routes to the Caribbean and Central America, where its ability to operate from short, rough fields was invaluable. It flew for American Airways, United, and a dozen smaller carriers. The Trimotor didn't just fly routes, it established them, but the plane's impact went beyond scheduled service. Its ruggedness made it a tool for exploration and adventure. In 1929, the explorer Richard E. Byrd used a Ford Trimotor, the Floyd Bonnet, to make the first flight over the South Pole. The same year, a Trimotor was used in the first successful air-rail transcontinental passenger service. In 1932, Franklin D. Roosevelt famously flew in a Trimotor from Albany to Chicago to accept the Democratic presidential nomination, becoming the first candidate to campaign by air. The aircraft served as aerial ambulances, forest fire patrol planes, and flying freight trucks. In remote areas like Alaska and the Canadian bush, stripped-down Trimotors hauled everything from mining equipment to sled dogs, earning a reputation as the flying pickup truck of the frontier. Perhaps the most bizarre testament to its strength came from stunt pilots. In the early 1930s, pilots like Harold Johnson and Al Wilson performed full aerobatic routines, loops, rolls, and spins in the lumbering Trimotor at air shows. Audiences gasped as the corrugated beast, which looked like a flying warehouse, tumbled through the sky with a grace that defied its appearance. These displays, while never endorsed by Ford, were powerful, visceral advertisements for the airframe's incredible structural integrity. For all its strengths, the Ford Trimotor's reign was surprisingly short. By the early 1930s, its weaknesses were becoming obvious. It was slow, with a top cruising speed barely over 100 miles per hour. That corrugated metal skin, while iconic, created massive drag, making it a real gas guzzler and inside the cabin. It was deafening. You couldn't even have a conversation, and a constant bone-rattling vibration was exhausting for passengers. More importantly, the world of aviation was sprinting ahead. The revolutionary Boeing 247 appeared in 1933, followed by the Douglas DC-2 a year later. These were sleek, all-metal monoplanes with retractable landing gear and smooth, cantilevered wings. They were faster, quieter, smoother, and way more efficient. They weren't just an improvement, they were the future. Then, the Great Depression hit, and it was the final nail in the coffin. The market for expensive transport planes just vanished overnight. Henry Ford himself started to lose his passion for aviation. He was discouraged by how quickly the technology was changing and deeply affected by the tragic death of a close friend in a plane crash. In 1933, after building just 199 planes, Ford Motor Company built its very last Trimotor. The assembly line went quiet. Ford's brief but brilliant adventure in aviation was over. But if you only judge the Trimotor by its short production run or its 199-unit total, you're missing the whole point. You're missing its monumental legacy. It wasn't the final chapter in aircraft design. It was the first word in a brand new language, the language of commercial aviation. The Ford Trimotor achieved something no aircraft had ever done before. It made scheduled air travel a real, credible, and viable business. How did it do that? It built public trust. It showed people that planes could be mechanically reliable. It professionalized the cockpit, turning pilots from daredevils into trained operators. It even introduced the concept of the cabin attendant. The Trimotor proved the value of all-metal construction and assembly line production, two principles that would define the entire aerospace industry for the next 100 years. Its story is a perfect example of a transitional moment in technology. It's about the right machine showing up at exactly the right time to bridge the gap between a risky experiment and an everyday tool. It looked industrial because it was industrial. It was a machine built to do a tough job, to forge a new system of travel from raw metal and pure determination. Think of it this way. The Trimotor was less an airplane and more a flying promise, a promise of reliability. It sent a clear message to a nervous public that the sky wasn't just for heroes and adventurers anymore. It was for everyone. The roar of the Tin Goose has long since faded, but its echo is in every single jetliner that streaks across the sky today. It built the very foundation that our global air network rests on. It transformed flight from a spectacle into a schedule, from a wild adventure into a dependable service. When you look at its corrugated metal skin, you're looking at the blueprint for our modern, connected world. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the machine that built an industry, please give this video a like. It truly helps the channel. Here at Winds of Thought, we explore the incredible stories behind the inventions, ideas, and individuals who shaped our world. So subscribe to see where we're flying to next. Sometimes, progress doesn't look elegant. It looks corrugated, loud, and utterly dependable.